Disney's Cruella, a novelization. Chapter 11. Estella had always loved the planning part of the trio's heist. It was fun, a good distraction, and a way to feel like she had some control over her life. Now it was business. She wanted to get that necklace back, and if the Baroness suffered a bit along the way, so be it. She had hurt Estella. Now Estella would hurt her back. Fortunately, Estella had come to learn that the Baroness was a creature of habit. She started every morning with the same meal. She had lunch from the same 3 spots. Her 9-minute power nap occurred every day exactly 13 minutes after her last bite of lunch. Her bodyguards never changed, because if they did, she would have to train a new pair, and that would cost her time. And time, as she reminded everyone, was money. So life, for the Baroness, was routine. This was just what Estella wanted. Cognizance began almost immediately. Walking into the warehouse the next morning, Estella felt as if she were seeing it for the first time. She was no longer looking at it as a place to create fashion, form ideas. Instead, it was a mark. She kept an eye on when the bodyguards arrived. She noted what, if anything, distracted them. Sitting in the Baroness's office, she noted that John, the valet, always kept a hand near the large key ring he wore looped on his belt. "No chance I'm going to get the necklace there," Estella told the boys after her first day of surveillance. "We're going to need to go for it where she would least expect it, at her house." There was just one problem. Ipswich Manor was almost as heavily fortified as the warehouse. The Baroness took no chances. She had cameras. She had guards. She had the dogs. But Estella had worked as a thief long enough to know that every camera had a blind spot. Every security guard had a weakness. And every dog, well, dogs could be bribed, she hoped. "You have to get us as much intel as you can," Jasper said one night as Estella plotted and fumed. She had wanted this to be a quick job. In, out. Get the necklace and get away from the Baroness. But it was proving to be much more complicated. Still, she knew that Jasper was right. The more information they had, the better prepared they would be. So while the Baroness took a power nap in her bedroom one afternoon, Estella snuck out and did a sweep of the halls. If a random guard spotted her, she made an excuse about looking for the bathroom, even as she kept her eye on the clock. 9 minutes wasn't a lot of time, but after several days, she thought she had enough. Standing in front of a wall at the lair, Estella reviewed the gathered intel. The wall had become mission control. There were lists of names, blueprints to the manor, dates circled in red, pictures of all the guards, and a list of the dog's favorite treats. In the middle of it all was an invitation, links of string linking it to a dozen other pieces of information. "Her black and white ball," Estella said, turning to look at the boys. "That's where we'll do it." She had taken her time making the decision. The house would be at capacity. The necklace would be tucked away in the safe where the Baroness kept all her jewels. The guards would be looking out for intruders, not thinking to look in, and especially not thinking to look at Estella. After all, she had proved her loyalty, or so they thought. "It's our biggest job ever," Jasper said, taking off his hat and holding it nervously to his chest. Estella nodded. He was right, which meant their planning had to be meticulous. They all needed to be on the exact same page. She looked down and saw that Horace was lying on a pile of papers. She sighed. "Disable the security system," she said, thinking out loud. "Bypass the cameras. Open the safe. Steal the necklace." It sounded simple enough. "Get out without being seen," Horace pointed out from the floor. Yes, there was that. But that was why Estella had chosen the ball. It made for a perfect cover. "During the biggest party of the season," she said, shaking off his concern. "So many people we can get lost in the sea. And then, when we need it, a distraction, where I get the key for the keypad and the safe." It seemed simple enough to Estella, but looking at Jasper, she saw his brows were furrowed. That was never a good thing. It meant he was thinking, and if he was thinking, he was probably finding holes in her plan. Estella was right. Jasper had been thinking and listening. He was impressed with Estella's attention to detail and the plan that she had concocted, but he was also a little nervous. There were so many variables, and part of their success came from keeping the jobs manageable. This one seemed huge and far too personal. Walking to the wall that had become the trio's makeshift mission control, Jasper stared at its contents, like they alone could give him the answers. What's the distraction? I've discovered that she likes to throw women who offend her sensibilities out of her parties. Old women, sad women, women in green, women who carry poodles, Estella explained, but also stunningly dressed women who pull the focus off her. Jasper nodded. So that was how Estella was going to get to the Baroness and the necklace. So we need to find one of them, Horace mused, catching on. Jasper shot him a smile. Even though his friend could be slow to catch on, he usually did, just at his own speed. The old woman seems easiest. To his surprise, Estella rolled her eyes. That wasn't like her. But then again, she hadn't been herself since she found out the truth. He was trying to be understanding, but there were moments, like now, when her attitude made him uncomfortable. Horace was her friend. He was family. He wasn't always speedy, but Jasper knew Horace would be there for her. Me, she said, collecting herself. I'm going to be the distraction. She smiled. Mayhem, destruction, death. It's my specialty. Jasper cocked his head and shot Estella a funny look. She shifted under his gaze, clearly uncomfortable. He knew she had been joking, but the death part? That was a bit much. For a moment, he thought about correcting her, but then he shrugged. Here's the problem, he said instead. Won't she recognize you? Horace nodded in agreement. That is a problem. Estella shrugged. I guess, she said. And won't you lose your job when that happens? Jasper pointed out. A job I think you love. A job he got you, Horace added, earning looks from both Estella and Jasper. For someone who seemed to never be following along, he was often spot on. Estella lowered her eyes, and Jasper knew that Horace had struck a nerve. He couldn't imagine what she was going through or what she was feeling. They hadn't been there that night. They hadn't watched the Baroness coldly turn her back on Estella's mum, and they hadn't been there in the office when she had just brushed off what happened as a mere inconvenience. He knew that this was about more than the necklace, but he also knew Estella wouldn't say that. And even if Jasper and Horace was right, she had worked too hard on all the recon and planning to back out now. There was only going to be a small window of time when the necklace would be accessible in the safe. Lifting her head, Estella steeled her expression. I want it back, she said. Jasper winced at the hardness in her voice. What she says goes, Horace said, shrugging. Estella nodded and then turned to look at the wall. Jasper was right. While Estella wouldn't give him the satisfaction of acknowledging how much she loved the job she was about to lose, she couldn't deny that the Baroness would recognize her. Unless... Estella can't go to the ball, she said, but I know someone who can. Estella's long legs carried her swiftly down the London street. Her head moved back and forth as she scanned the shop windows. Estella's steps slowed as she passed by a vintage clothing shop. Standing front and center in the window display was a mannequin dressed in a stunning evening gown, matched with a wild jacket and neon pops of color. It was wickedly fun and vibrant and alive, just Estella's style. Quickly she walked into the store. A bell jingled as the door opened and shut behind her. The tiny space was full of racks of all types of clothes, brightly colored tops, flowered pants, maxi dresses, short dresses, Tall boots, high heels, neon headbands. Every style from what seemed the last 3 decades was piled, hung, or dumped around the space. Estella loved it. A tall man with hair perfectly coiffed into a Bowie-style pompadour was perched on a chair, hitting the broken air conditioner. But he stopped what he was doing at the sound of the bells and turned toward Estella. His face was painted with a big bolt of lightning. Clearly, he was a fan of all things Ziggy Stardust. "Welcome to Second Time Around. I'm Artie," he said cheerfully. "Or Art, as in a work of art." Estella nodded. "You do look incredible," she said. And he did. The makeup was perfect, down to the subtle eyeshadow that made his eyes pop and the blush on his cheeks that made them stand out. He had treated his face like a canvas, and the result was stunning. "I hear that all day," he said with a shrug, "so I guess it's true." "How does that look go on the street?" she asked curiously. "Some abuse and insults, of course," Artie replied matter-of-factly, "but I like to say normal is the cruelest of all insults, and at least I never get that." Estella smiled. She had clearly found a kindred spirit in Artie. From the display window to what Artie wore, he spoke her fashion language through and through. She had a feeling they were going to get along just fine. "I need a gown," she said, cutting to the chase, "for a ball, and it needs to make an impact." Artie gestured to the room around them. "Well, look around, Cinderella," he said happily. "I have everything a girl or boy could ever want. If you can dream it, I can dress it." Estella began to peruse the racks like a kid in a candy store. Artie was right. He did have everything she could ever want or dream up. Dior 56, Chanel 32, black gowns, white gowns, bright gowns. It was hard to pick what she loved most, but her eye kept going back to the red dress in the window. "Baroness 65, Artie said, noticing her glance. "Winter collection." Estella nodded. "I noticed that," she said. "And I call that fate." Red. Since she was a girl and she had met Jasper and Horace, Estella had been dyeing her hair the same shade of red. For most people, it would have been a bold color choice, but given Estella's natural locks, it felt safe to her. Now, though, it had to go. Standing over the sink, she let the water run until it was lukewarm, which was about as warm as it ever got in the lair. Watching as the water swirled down the drain, Estella took a deep breath. She was about to change something that had defined her for years. When she had first dyed her hair, she had been grieving. Her mum was gone. She had no home. She had only just met Jasper and Horace. Hiding who she really was didn't feel wrong. On the contrary, it felt necessary. In the years since, she had grown to love the red. It was who she was now, a departure from who she had been then. Still, if she was going to pull off her plan to retrieve her necklace and have even a shot of doing so unrecognized, getting rid of the red seemed like the best solution. Dipping her hair under the flow, she watched as red dye swirled down the drain. The water gradually faded from bright red to pink, and then to clear. When she stood up, the woman staring back in the mirror was at once familiar and a stranger. Estella gave her reflection a nod. It was done. Now it was time for action.